because sometimes people want it personalized, but I'll just...
All right. Action.
I have a headset. I can sit here and do the presentation like that.
All right, welcome everybody. Just want to let you know at the end of our presentation we have a ritual of passing the black hat. It takes a lot to keep this place open and looking good. This morning we had our cleanup crew here with Jackson, Boomer, Larry, and Security Bob, and we got it all looking nice for you. So, and that's Boomer, yeah. They're the supervisors. So today we have author, historian, and model shipbuilder Bridge Carney. He's going to talk about the PT-157 and a couple of books he wrote. First Up and
that one there. That's,
PT-157, yes.
That one's about the making of the model. This one's about the crew.
Right.
Yeah.
So in addition to being a historian, author, and model shipbuilder, Mr. Carney has spent nearly all his professional career in high technology. His employment has been equally divided among engineering, marketing, and sales. He's carried out assignments with both the largest and smallest technology companies, as well as both national and international sales. We at the Port Hueneme Historical Society Museum are honored to have you here today.
Thank you.
And would like to introduce you to our guest. Thank you.
Thank you. This is my man purse, which weighs about 10 pounds, so I'll take it off. But you should get one. All those pockets are really handy. So thanks for having me. I love talking about the PT boats, and in this case the PT-157 in particular. And why is because I developed personal relationships with a couple of the crewmen before they passed away and got a lot of stories out of them. The stuff that doesn't show up in the logbooks and doesn't show up in any other books, but some rather spectacular missions that they just said, just doing my job. That Greatest Generation thing really can humble you when they talk about what they did and just do it in sort of a low tone, like so fascinating stuff. So thank you for introducing me. That's me. And the two other people we're going to talk about is William Bud Liebenau. He was the skipper, and Wilfred West as the torpedo man. Interesting backgrounds because Liebenau never lived in Virginia, so he'd never been on the water, whereas Wilfred West, his father was a fisherman off the coast of Virginia, so he's very acclimated to the water. And that's why Wilfred West did a lot of the driving of the boat, as they call it. And also, if not, he was looking out. His eyes, the skipper always commented that Wilfred could look out and see coconut logs, which was one of the dangers of a PT boat, because PT boats only swam around islands. PT boats are shallow water boats, although they were pressed into a deep water mission when they saved MacArthur off of Corregidor when he was penned in, couldn't get him out. It was Commander Bulkley and 3 PT boats that went in and extracted MacArthur, and for that Bulkley received the Medal of Honor. And then Bulkley's executive officer will become William Liebenau's commander out in the Solomon Islands. Wilfred West, by the way, interesting, he's the torpedo man. He worked at a torpedo factory before he entered the service. He worked at a torpedo factory in Yorktown, Virginia, so he knew all about torpedoes. Which is why he got an excellent commendation from the person running that, because it's a military-civilian operation, much like we do around here, and got that recommendation when he joined the service. So as I said, day after Pearl Harbor, what we're going to see are the people on these early boats were the ones that joined the day after Pearl Harbor. So Wilfred West, William Liebenau, they immediately joined up and said, we're in. They had jobs, they were doing things, but they said, I'm going. And at that moment, that was understood that that was okay. You know, employers are like, you know, God bless, good luck. Here they are looking pretty. I wanted to show their pretty shots because I'll show you their ugly shots too. So they deserve to have their good moment here. So here's their formal shots. Liebenau is a lieutenant junior grade, and Wilfred West is a first-class torpedo man. take them down a little bit now. This is why I show you the pretty shots, because the other ugly shots is when you're in the Solomon Islands, you're pretty much stripped down to whatever you want to wear. So Welford, who's on the right side there, Welford West, you'll see the many shots and he has no shirt on. Oh my gosh, these guys never got skin cancer, and I don't know why. It's an amazing thing. They did not die of skin cancer. And then the skipper over here, you can see the sort of reflection. You used to have a plastic insert. You put your name tag and stuff like that inside of your hat. That's a bigger picture where one of the major visits was happening. I zoomed in. That's as good as an officer's uniform looks, and he rarely wore that. Matter of fact, in that opening shot where you see him on the front of the boat, the skipper has on sort of tight shorts and a white shirt. He said, I wore that for about 2 months at a time. You know, you jump in the water every once in a while, these guys would to wash themselves off. It also rained most every day. In the Solomon Islands down near the equator, you get a lot of rain. So when the rains come in the afternoon, they sort of lather, or the rains would come, they lather up and try to rinse off really quick, and that was how they bathed. So again, to focus in, that's the skipper with the binoculars on. This is Kelly, who was the XO for Bulkley when they rescued MacArthur. And this is Welford in this position. So Welford's usually either here or he's driving the boat. There is an XO on board. I will tell you one of the darker things about it is nobody got along with the XO, the PT-157. He was more to the Annapolis kind of guy, and this was not an Annapolis kind of an assignment. He didn't like with the crews. He thought that there should be a really strict division, and he tried to enforce rules that the skipper told me once or twice he had to walk him off the boat and said, no, we're not doing that. Other than that, the rest of the crew is very tight. There are 2 people on board, the quartermaster and the machinist mate, which is called a motorback on a PT boat. So they were 40 years old. So the quartermaster was a CPA. And the motorback was a mechanic from Northern California. Everybody was joining in because of the results of Pearl Harbor. People pitched in and said, I'm in. So they're not all 20-something-year-olds on board the boat. There's a mixture going on. And they were picked at random. All the volunteers, PT duty was a volunteer thing. You weren't assigned to it, you had to ask for it. So the officers also all got reviewed by Bulkley before they became officers. A little bit like what Zumwalt used to do with the subs. You know, he used to personally interview all the officers, the top officers on submarines. Bulkley used to do that with the PT boats.
Rich?
Yeah.
What are the playing cards?
The playing card, this says aces and eights. Really good question. This is aces and eights. Much like bombers did with their big paintings on the front of the bombers. And they have all this sort of risque stuff or dark humor stuff or gallows humor, as my dad used to call it. Aces and eights. The dead man's hand. So the cards were painted on, and this happened in Panama where everyone was off the boat. One of the crewmen decided he was going to name it Aces and Eights. And he painted this on, they came back on board and said, well, there we are. We're now the Aces and Eights. Before I leave this picture, I was saying before, this is one of the rarest things that you'll see on a PT boat, because PTs did not fight during the daytime. This is an actual mission photograph. This boat is on a live mission. It's in daylight. It's coming out of Andover Harbor, which I'll show you later on, but you can see the curl. And he's going at high speed, none of which PTs did. They never went at high speed. They never went out at daytime. They never went out on missions. And we'll get into that a little bit. But this is an extraordinary photograph for that reason. You notice that, in all the pictures and combat pictures, and we're coming up to D-Day, it's all daylight stuff. These are night fighters. So how did I get involved with PT boats? Well, my dad was an Army Air Force kind of guy, so how did I get switched on to the Navy? Well, I had a friend who built a boat model and said, I want to build a boat model. And he built one that was like a leisure craft, and I said, I want to build something with some history behind it. And the PT boat seemed like a pretty good choice. So I look around the forums, the internet's alive. There's more information today about PT boats, the history, the construction. There's more information today than there had been for the previous 40 years, since the end of the war. All the blueprints, I can get a DVD, and all the blueprints for making of a PT boat are available, and that's because they were in the National Archives, and somebody doing research had them transposed into PDFs. And so you can get information on anything. As a matter of fact, there was a couple of mysteries about the boat, and I'll get into the back here in a minute, but I couldn't resolve them, so I kept building and building other parts of the boat, putting off this back part, and then magically, this guy comes up with a DVD and answered the questions, and I could then construct the muffler system on the back of the PT boat. This model, in total, has cost me about $2,500 to make, and about $2,000 is in the trash, because I kept building it, and I didn't like it, and I would rebuild it and make the details better and better and better. I even got very, very good at what's called photo etching. And I'd send my photo etch design over to Scotland, and I'd get a plate back, and then I could break off all the pieces. So I kept tearing pieces off and rebuilding it for extreme detail. So it's one of the best extreme detail, accurate details of the PT boat model that exists.
How many years did you
It took about 5-6 years, and it's not because I went from front to back, but because I got a lot of work done, and I went back and tore this apart. I mean, you look at it, people go, oh, what a beautiful model. And you go, yeah, but this isn't right. And they're like, oh, no. You know, one of the things about being a good model builder is being willing to tear it apart and go for the next level of accuracy or new information that comes along.
Is that right, Tony? We have a model builder in-house too, so
Got it.
he's listening very intently.
Well, some model builders will build 50 models in their lifetime. I built little ones when I was small, but you know, as long as I got one that's right, I was happy with that. So PT boat, we were talking about down in New Orleans. That's a Huckins or Higgins boats. There were three major models of PT boats. The ones we all sort of know and understand is the Elko version, built in Bayonne, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. And they were 80 foot long, powered by 3 Packard engines. So the Packard engines, there's 3 screws. The 2 outboard screws are fairly high, and the center one is fairly low. That comes into the story a little bit later on. Oh, right, that's interesting. And in what direction do the screws turn? Yeah, good answer. They all turn in the same direction, which flabbergasts people. All the props on the boat they spun in the same direction because everyone thinks that there would be counterbalancing. No, they all spun the same way. So when the PT boat took off, the skipper had to know how to put a little English on the wheel because the thing wanted to go this way. And the same thing when it went backwards, it had a tendency to pull. One of the pleasures of my model when it was done is I put it in the pool and I made it go backwards, and it pulled just like they said, the account of the skipper said about how you backed up a PT boat. So I was pretty pleased about that. Notice the color.
Yeah.
You all watch McHale's Navy, right? PT boats are gray, aren't they? PT boats are sometimes referred to as the plywood Navy. A little disparaging. I think some was from the enemy, and most of it was from the Deepwater Navy. The Deepwater Navy had a little bit of resentment going on, but the Deepwater Navy was where? It was at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, so they were in a rebuilding stage. So the impetus of building PT boats was to put something together and throw it in front of the enemy just to create havoc. So one of their nicknames is the mosquito fleet. You know, those annoying things that show up. So why would you take a PT boat seriously? For the same reason that if you were the commander of the USS Cole, you now know to take small boats seriously. Small boats with deadly devices. I took it down the torpedo tubes. I don't care how big a boat is. If it's got a torpedo on it, you got to pay attention to it. So the other thing about a PT boat, it came from the designs of leisure crafts in the 1930s and 40s. They took them and they had races and all this kind of stuff. So they picked certain designs, but in actuality, this is the hull, and you can see it's a little grainy in Bayonne, New Jersey. It's 2 layers overlapping of mahogany. So there's about 1 million screws in the hull because they screw all that together with layers in between. Very durable, very rugged, excellent for the sea. I don't have a picture of it, but there is a famous picture of a PT boat where an enemy torpedo went right through the hull and went out the other side, and so it's moving along and it's got a hole clear through it, but it kept going. But it's all wooden on the bottom with mahogany, and then there are plywood structures on top. So what you saw is the PT boat hulls were built upside down because it was easier to access the hull from in that manner, and then the cranes would come and flip them over. And in this place, now they're putting the top decks on, which were teak and mahogany, and then another section of Elco was building the cabins that then be placed over the top. The back deck was totally removable because that gave you access to all 3 engines, because the engines did need to be serviced from time to time. And the PT-157, as we'll learn shortly, its engines got shot up in its very first mission. I'm a little bit off on the scale there, but some fun facts, not really fun, just facts about PT boats. The most well-known of the PT boats, not well-known because it was the greatest boat, but it was all known because of the Kennedy situation. So we all know that profile of what Kennedy had. PTs in the Pacific fought at night. PTs avoided going very fast, despite being able to go nearly 60 miles an hour. When the PT-157 was in training down in Panama, they got about 58 miles an hour out of their boat. They were time trials. So they could go full out, but rarely did. PT boats had no sonar, and just this, you know this, so I'm just putting some context. Remember that they have no sonar, and a few of them have radar, but most of them do not. They were delivered in gray to the U.S. Navy and repainted green in the Pacific. Why? Because from aerial, in the areas that the PTs were fighting, it was contested area, both on ground and in the air. You had enemy planes passing each other all the time. And if the PT boats during the daytime, sometimes, like in Lever Harbor, they snugged up underneath the trees, so they'd be very hard to see. But the waters down there are also very green, so if a PT boat happened to be out at daylight for some reason, if it could shut its engines off, it could sit on the water and be very hard to spot. Nicknames, as I said, the Plywood Navy, the Mosquito Fleet, and the one I did not mention, the one is the favorite of PT crewmen, it was the double boats. And because it was assigned to them, they learned through interception and stuff like that, that they were referred to as the double boats. That was their favorite one. If the enemy thinks I'm the devil, we're in good shape. All right, I was just talking about the back of the PT boat, which was perplexing to me. I did have pictures, but I'm a very, very detail-oriented kind of a guy, and I couldn't quite get all the dimensions and stuff. This is actually the back, coincidentally, of the PT-109.
Really?
As it's sitting on top of a freighter ship, and I'll show you a picture in a little bit, but they used to put PTs on top of freighter ships, on top of dollies, and I think for reporting reasons, they took pictures of the boats on top of the freighter ships and submitted that to the Navy, saying, yes, we did actually have the PT-109 or the 157 or whatever it is. Here's a picture of what I did. And maybe that's how they got paid. The fabulous thing about a PT boat is there's 2 exhausts per engine. So I got 3 engines, I got 6 exhausts. This system is the silencing, the muffler system. And what happened is if you wanted to go fast, the skipper would pull a lever and open up these flapper valves. Exhaust would go straight out. That way you did not have any impediment to any back pressure into the engines. They would just go full out. That's when you go 60 miles an hour. But hey, I need to sneak up on the Japanese sometimes. I need to do some stealthy kind of stuff. And the PT boats used to sort of sit out on water and station, waiting all night to see if anything was passing their way. So what you did is the skipper then closed these valves. So this closed the valves, forced the exhaust down through the bottom of the muffler, and this is the water line. So what you got was sort of a very, very stealth. That was stealth for that time. So one of the features, because they knew that these boats were going to be in close proximity, Bulkley's book about PT boats was called At Close Quarters. And he said the best way for a PT boat to attack was to slowly move forward, position themselves against an enemy ship, fire torpedoes, and slowly withdraw and turn without being seen or heard. So this is the premise as to why this is a very interesting arrangement on the back of a PT boat. Welford said he got excited one time. He was at the wheel, and he gunned the engine. I don't talk about this mission, but he gunned the engine to get out of a harbor because they were starting to be fired upon, and had forgotten to open up the valves. And when he got back, all the mufflers were a little bit bigger than what they were when they left, so they had to be replaced. This, by the way, a nice close-up. One of the great defensive weapons is a smoke generator.
Oh.
So under attack or in certain conditions, you would have somebody back there and they would flip the handle and smoke would pour out, because the PT boats, if they were being fired upon, what they tended to do is that they worked in pairs often, is you'd turn on smoke and you'd zigzag and just create the biggest cloud you could and then divert wherever you could see tracers or whatever, try to get away from that area, but you got smoke behind you. So that was your cushion between, if you were spotted, between you and death. Oh, about those torpedoes. They were defective. And it wasn't figured out until sometime later in the war that they were defective. And as I understand it, I think I read this, U.S. Congress very quietly wanted to do an investigation. The Congress today doesn't do anything quietly, but very quietly during the war, you did certain things very quietly. One is, what do you mean the torpedoes didn't work? I think it wasn't until they took a submarine off of Diamond Head at Hawaii, fired 4 torpedoes into the solid rock at the base of Diamond Head underwater, and they all clinked and fell down into the bottom and never went off, that they realized that they proved to the Admiralty that there was a problem with the torpedoes. The torpedoes were, I'll jump down here and go back up top. They ran 11 feet lower than what was called for in the original design. So it was a World War I design, the torpedo, but in the time between that and World War II, when they put it into production, very low-level production, interesting, is a lot of the production people replaced parts with heavier metal parts. So it weighed more. So it actually went 11 feet lower, which actually made it go underneath most of the Japanese ships that they were ever fired at. So on August 1st, the night Kennedy is lost, the squadron fires about 32 torpedoes, and the skippers, these very confident, very knowledgeable skippers said, I fired right at that damn thing, and nothing happened. Well, the next morning, the coast watchers, so there were Australian and English and American coast watchers on the islands, could see torpedoes floating in the water or torpedoes that had gone up on the sands on nearby islands. So they just went right underneath the ships and just kept going, because the ships hugged the shorelines. So they'd be on the deep water side, they'd fire these ships to go underneath, and then it'd go up onto the sand. Something went off. I'm on. The bulb went off.
The bulb went off?
Well, there's no light.
Timer?
Shut off at the computer.
Computer's on.
No, it's the projector that's.
And the bulb burned out.
You just go off the bulb. Well, there's a light on.
Go back up.
So were all the torpedoes duds? Did any?
No, yeah, all the torpedoes, and what it came out is they ran too low, There's also something about the dynamics of the fusing system that they did not work correctly at the equator. There were magnetically charged systems, and they finally figured out that the device, when you hit a contact, went through a series of steps, and because of their location on Earth, there you go, must be a timer, that the location, the way the fuse was structured, that they frequently did not work. So what did they do? I didn't put that in the presentation, but it's a very good question. You'll see that in the fall of 1943, they start to remove those torpedo tubes and put what's called hanging racks, and they use the aerial dive torpedoes in place of the naval submarine torpedoes.
You mean the ones that they had on the torpedo planes they were using?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it was a bad thing. I said, why didn't PT boats go fast? Okay, here's a PT boat. All right, if you just want to put up neon signs and says, hit me, to the enemy, look at what happens here. Now, there's no picture of it, but everyone's pretty knowledgeable about what happens in those kind of waters. That if you're going that fast, you also create churn. So at nighttime, algae, plankton start to light up. So if you went that fast, even at nighttime, you're leaving this humongous trail. I remember I talked about the three propellers on the back of the boat. The skippers tended to use the center propeller because it was deeper, rather than the outer propellers, because they didn't say, okay, whoop, time to go back to base and zip home. They tried to go back to base. You know, it's your life. So you try to go back to base at a low speed, and the crew's also looking and listening for airplanes, because that's your enemy. Time to move out. This is the PT-157 actually on board, and this is a dolly system that I told you about where they mounted series of PTs. I think there's 9 PTs on this particular boat. There's other pictures of the back of the boat. The day they left for Panama, it had snowed. They're in New York. So in a couple of days, they'll be down in the warm climes of Panama, but they'll appreciate that because they left when it snowed.
That's a Liberty ship, too. That's a 24-hour ship. That's a Liberty.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's the USS Whitehall or something. I know the name of the ship, but I did not. And I know I've heard of a Liberty ship.
It's superstructure.
The freighters.
It's not well, yeah,
Yeah.
because the Victory ship is bigger
Right.
than the Liberty ship. The Liberty ships they only went about 9 knots.
Yeah, there was no need for them to go fast.
Yeah.
They were just hauling stuff. So to get our relationship on where we're going, because we're moving out, the ship, the offloading ship of the Liberty ship, the USS Whitehall, would be in New Caledonia. Here's the northeastern tip of Australia. Here's the Coral Sea. And then the Solomon Islands are up here. And there's 2 groups, hard to see, but there's 2 groups of them. In the center, that became known as the slot. That's where the Japanese were coming down and trying to bring material and men down into originally Guadalcanal, and then later they brought it to New Georgia Island, which is north of here, and that's where RON 9, that's the short name. A squadron was called a RON, R-O-N. So our group for today was RON 9. They made their way from New Caledonia up to Tulagi, and then the Tulagi, they rotated up to first up to the frontline positions. A little more close up of where we're going. Guadalcanal, Tulagi's here. Then they're going to move, come out here, go up this coastline, and then we're going, this is New Georgia Island. They're going to curl around into Rendova Harbor. This is Kolombangara. This island has 10,000 Japanese on it, 10,000 Japanese soldiers. So you are at the front line. And my next slide, I think, zooms in a little bit. So now we zoomed in even more. Here's that Kolombangara, 10,000. This is Blackett Strait. where they do a lot of, from Rendova, they move up and do a lot of night missions, looking for trouble. So they're in this little harbor here. There's a Japanese airfield here, about 15 miles away. This is from the book. It just shows that I'm capable of making a lot of lines and putting a lot of words on a map. Okay, so PT base Rendova. So they're in this harbor. It's actually not much of a harbor. There's just a bunch of sandbars that protect it on the outer edge. Yeah. So now I clean it up a little bit. Here you can see that sandbars kind of protection, and here's Munda airfield. Sort of close. Welcome, neighbor. And that's even more close up. So Lambari Island is here. So this is the entrance to the harbor. Lambari Island is here. That's where the headquarters for Ron 9 was. So that was a bunch of tents pitched up on the island. That's where the officers slept. The crews slept on boat, which were out on the moorings offshore. So they just went back and forth using LSTs to get to and from the boats. When they left to Lagi, they were told to get a bunch of food from the quartermaster, put it on boat, sort of like a submarine. You just load up your boat. Well, later on, when they started running out of food, what to do is the Navy was showing up, and the Army too, because the Army is now going to put 105s over here and try to do something about that airfield. That's going to cause problems. So when the Army and Navy came in, the PT guys were like those monkeys out in the Mediterranean. What's not Diamond Head, Gibraltar. So they would distract some of the LST guys, and they'd have conversations while some of the crewmen jumped over the edge of the LST and started throwing food back over, put it into the skiff, and get back to the boat. So they were sort of on their own. Yeah. So as a nice shot at the time, right after the war apparently, because there's nothing in harbor, but this was their entry point. And this will come back to play when we talk about the first mission at the PT-157. This is Lambari Island over here. And so the boats would come in here, and they would fasten themselves to the moorings in that location. So already you get the sense that they've loaded up their ship. Oh, the quartermaster back at Tulagi, by the way. So our skipper was told to go get goods for the whole squadron. So he was given a list, and he gets to the dock at Tulagi, and all the material comes back, and then there's this box, and he opens the box up, and there's a note inside, and it's 2 bottles of booze. And the note inside is from an officer, a quartermaster officer at Tulagi, who was the person who he took his bike route from when he was growing up. That person got old enough that he gave Liebenau the bike route, so the world starts to get really small.
Wow.
Because here's the guy that I got my bicycle route. He just gave me the food. We're out in the middle of the Pacific, nowhere land, and he gave me the food. And there are certain instances like that like, how does that happen? It's like being in a room and finding out 4 people have the same birthday you have. The odds become extraordinary. But that skipper says, I just shake my head. I can't believe it. That's what a logbook looks like from the PT-157. MTB stands for Motor Torpedo Boat. Ron 9. That's what that is up here. The information inside of the logbook is pretty much useless as far as what actually happened in a mission. All they did is they said, we cleaned our guns, we took on fuel, and here are the boats we went out on that night. Why? Well, if you're captured, you don't want to say, hey, we shot the crap out of these Japanese last night, and man, we're coming back tomorrow, and Tony did this. So there was no detail inside of the logbook. The only detail you get is by a verbal review with the crewmen who were there to find out what happened. So Welford was the talkative one, our torpedo man. So in making my model, I should say, you figured out that everyone made the 109. Okay. Then I sat there and I said, well, who rescued the 109? So I read the story. This is the boat, and this is the crew that will rescue the 109. So I decided to dedicate my model after the guys who rescued the crew of the 109. But then you also find out that a PT boat kept changing. You know how we have what we call platforms today, and you arm your platform, make a lot of airplanes and ships with, depending upon the mission. So boats kept being changed, the PT boats. Those torpedo tubes will go away. The armament on the Ron 9s in the front turret were 9 millimeters. No other squadron had a 9 millimeter in the front. 20 millimeter. I'm sorry, 20 millimeter in the front. But that's because Kelly knew what the mission was going to be, and he wanted more firepower than 50 calibers. So when they were making the boats for his squadron back in New York, he said, hey, I want 20 millimeters in the front. And they said, who are you? I said, I'm the guy who rescued MacArthur. Okay, we'll call this an experiment. I read all the paperwork on this. We're going to call this an experiment, okay? You tell us how it goes when you get out there. So the Ron 9 boats had a unique feature that we'll see in another picture, where the front turret is housing a 20 millimeter Oerlikon, as well as the 20 millimeter Oerlikon that's on the back. So there's not much information, but Welford's a talkative one. The skipper was a yep, nope man. I'd say skipper, I call him skipper, and I said, Welford said this. Yep. And I called Welford back. He said, what did Skippo say? He had this, what they call tidewater action. What did Skippo say? I said, yep. Yeah, that's a skipper. No details, just yep and nope. So Welford gave me all the details to fill in about what was happening, but he couldn't remember the order of the missions during that summer, as extraordinary as some of these missions were. And yet he knew what boats he was out with that night. So if you catalog each mission night, later when I got these books, I could say, okay, this is the mission when he was talking about excuse me, being with this boat and this boat, this is this one. So I got to put them in chronological order. He got to tell me what happened on each of those nights. Sort of a sign of age. I have it too. I can remember what I did, but I don't know when I did it. You know, kind of a thing. Oh, and the skipper, I asked him about signing the book. He goes, I don't remember signing the book. And I said, he said, my quartermaster must have signed it for me every night. So these are really important documents, aren't they? All right, so here we're in Rendova Harbor. Here's Lombari Island. This is where the officers are. If anybody ever saw the movie PT-109, there's a quick conflagration of all the skippers, and the commander at that time is talking to all the skippers about what are they going to do. And it was thought at the time that it might have been a trap. This coconut thing was a trap by the Japanese. Well, that tent is on this island, Little Lombari Island. For those with great eyes, this is 250 caliber. This is what research, somebody asked me about research. 250 calibers. But up here is the 20 millimeter Oerlikon, another 20 millimeter Oerlikon. So I know that this is a Ron 9 boat, and this is a Ron 9 boat. This is some other boat that they brought in to supplement the squadron action out of Rendova Harbor. As what happened with the 109. They started to bring other boats up into the harbor to supplement the Ron 9 boats. Because Ron 9 actually lost 2 boats very early on. I told you about the 2 PTs that went aground, I mean. So they had to bring other boats up. And then this is an LST making its way in and out. So the crew slept out here, and the officers slept in tents on shore. That day that you saw the boat coming out of the harbor and that magnificent photo, this is the same day. So there was a combat photography team that wanted to do an article about PT boats. And Kelly said, no, I don't want you on my boat. These guys are it's nighttime, it's dangerous. They're moving by field, they know where to go, and if you're in their way, And what are you gonna take a picture of? We go out a lot on moonless nights. Here's a moonless night, and here's a picture. There's nothing there. But this situation came up, and Kelly finally relented and said, "Okay, yeah, you can go." So they went on board, and then this is the picture of the crew that they took just before they took off of that other picture where they're underway, as it's called. This is Kelly, 6'3". Interesting thing about Kelly that one of the other crewmen, that Ron 9 told me later on. No, he didn't tell me. He wrote it down because in 1963 somebody was trying to put together the story of the PT-157, one of the crewmen, and he said Kelly used to go out every night with one of the crews. He'd pick a boat and he'd go out on a mission every night. He was the man's man kind of commander. Where Warfield, who replaced him, always stayed in a tent at night back. They call him Foxhole Warfield because that's where you could find him. Kelly would be up on the bridge, and when they started doing barge busting, bullets were flying and plywood splintering and all sorts of stuff. And he said, he wrote and he said, he'd just sit there with his hand on his wrist, and he'd look at it and say, "Well, it's a hot one tonight." And he said that you could hear the thud, thud, thud all around him. If you know something about George Washington, when George Washington used to ride into battle, it was like he had an aura around him. Nothing ever hit him. It was the same thing with Kelly. He never got hit. And I don't know why, but some people have that mystique, and yet some people are not so fortunate. Nice profile shot of that 20 millimeter Oerlikon gun. I learned a lot about 20 millimeter Oerlikon when I made my model, because I made my own guns for that. On the front is a life raft. Point out it. Front is a life raft, and sometimes they put a dinghy on it. Depending upon the mission, they put a dinghy over it. When they rescued the crew of the 109, they put a dinghy over it because they knew they had to probably bring some wounded. They didn't know what they were going to find, but bring some wounded back in the dinghy. So 5 missions. So this is just the summer of '43. You're at the front line. The first one, I started a nickname Squeeze Play, and the torpedo man liked that. I said, "I like that, Squeeze Play. That's a good name for it." Yes.
Crew is what, 10 people?
The crews varied between 10 people to 14 people, and they grew as time went on. I think I mentioned that there were crews climbing all over the islands without any boats. So they had enough replacements, but they didn't have enough boats, so they started to overstock some of the boats to give everybody experience of being at the front line. So they did vary, but about that. So you had motor mechanics, at least 2, sometimes 3. You had a front turret gunner, you had a back turret gunner, you had the radio operator, you had the skipper, the XO, the 2 torpedo men. And you could have 2 or 3, and if you had enough people, you could have 3. But in the early days, there was just enough to give you the basic crew configuration. So Squeeze Play. It's their second night at the front line. Naval intelligence has radioed in to our little Lombari Island that there's Japanese cruisers on their way in. The suspicion, and I read later on, I think it's true through some of the Japanese research stuff, is these 105 howitzers are annoying the airfield people. They really don't like being fired upon by these long-range guns that the Army has on Rendova Island. So they're going to send some cruisers in and try to blast away and try to get rid of some of this stuff. So that was the Japanese mission. Japanese also knew that there were PT boats in the harbor. So what they did, I'll jump ahead a little bit, what they did is they peeled off a couple of boats to try to seal them into the harbor, while the other ships would then come around and then fire on the island and try to get rid of those gun emplacements. And this is what happened. There's Munda, the airfield, and here's us, a good 12 miles away from it. So a scramble is alerted for the Ron 9. 3 boats are put into action. And, the first 2, and then the third one, which is the PT-157, move out of Rendova, and they start to move west to go hunting. It's a moonless night. You can't see the ships. What you can see is when stars are missing. You know that something's out there. And as you go on the horizon, you get more stars, of course, because when they're overhead, they're sort of spaced out. On a moonless night in the South Pacific, it seems like there's endless stars, but as you get down to the horizon, they start to aggregate, and you can see a silhouette. So the first two PT boats have moved ahead, and Bud's working by himself, the skipper, and they see this silhouette. And so we're going to go after that one. Here's that one. Sometimes I forget where these things appear. I see a boat. I think I will go get that boat. So the plan is, going to go out here, going to swing a wide, and I want to fire my torpedoes at this ship from deep water towards land. Welford West is at the wheel. The skipper's watching everything. He has all the trust in the world for Welford commanding the wheel of the boat. So it's advancing, the boat that they're going to go after. They're positioning themselves, looking pretty good. OMG, as they say in today's internet. Oh my God. They're looking this way, getting ready to line up on this guy. And at the last human moment, Welford sees it at the same moment. They talked about this. We got together for a book signing about 5 years ago. And it said simultaneously they saw the side of a ship because they could look up and see the red out. You know how ships run red? They could see red out and say, oh my God. And skipper said, turn! And Welford saw they had a Necker's knob on the wheel. Necker's knob is one of these things that you can crank like this. And Welford's already turning it. So he turns the boat, the PT boat, as the ship approaches. It's the bow wake that pushes them away. That's how close they were. The bow wake pushes them away. Instead of another second off, and you got another PT 109 session here. All right. So who would have more empathy for Kennedy than a guy that almost had his boat cut in half? So the bow wake pushes them off, and as they move. He's pushed off. This ship that they were going to go after, through probably radio transmission, was told to speed up and catch up with these guys. So he's coming up fast. Guess who got caught in the middle?
Yeah.
So the 157 is going this way, caught in the middle. What do the Japanese do? Is they set up fire lines on the bow and the stern of both their boats. There's two ships. So what they do is on the stern they set up a gauntlet of fire. I used to love to say, it's a gauntlet of fire. A gauntlet of fire, and they do it on a slight angle away from each other. They don't want to shoot each other up. They also put a gauntlet of fire on the bow. Now this is a little bit up. The PT is right in the middle. And it's only time. It's only a matter of time before they're going to get shot to smithereens. Because they can't fire back. Because firing back would do what? Hi! Hit me! You know? So they can't do anything but stay center and hold tight. And as they drifted backwards towards the stern gauntlet of fire, for whatever reason, Providence, your God, whatever it is, the firing stopped. And so they pulled back a little quicker, and seconds later it started again, as if both ships were reloading their guns at that miracle moment. That boat managed to get back and out of that line of fire. So now they're out of line. They're still firing away. They're convinced there's something in between there. Those two cruisers know that there's something trapped and they're going to get it. What they don't know is they've escaped. So those are the balance of the ships coming in, but they're dissuaded because I don't think there's conclusive information that they've cleared out all the PTs, and there's those 2 other PTs that are out there causing problems. So they're dissuaded. The rest of the task group was dissuaded from doing anything. One of the ships, I read the naval account of the incident, is the Amagiri. We will meet the Amagiri again when it cuts Kennedy's boat in half. So one of the ships that he went against that night was Amagiri. When I say went against, I'm not sure it was a fair fight. That is a scaled representation of a PT boat versus the ships that they were going after that night. 80 foot versus 360 foot. All right, this one I talked about. I got here early, so I talked about the 153 and the 158 run aground. They're zipping along coming back from mission, going a little bit too fast and a little bit too close to the shore. And right in this line of sight of Munda Airfield. And they rip out the bottoms of the boat. So those guys get rescued, but there's critical intelligence information on board. This is when our illustrious crew goes out with Kelly. This is Smitty. The funny story about Smitty is Welford told me one day, you know how I told you to stand on the deck and lather up while it's raining? Suddenly, for some reason, the rain stopped and Smitty's covered with soap. And he goes, Jesus, God. And he has to jump in the water. Apparently they didn't like to jump in the water because all sorts of icky stuff around the water. But it turns out he and I were born in the same county in Pennsylvania, Bucks County. The research just gets, really? Are you kidding me? Born in Bucks County? So Kelly is going to go out on a skiff with 2 other people to visit those boats and take that stuff off. There's actually film of that incident, but I can't find the whole reel. I can only find a small sniglet of it. But they got close enough, and Kelly's rowing towards he's grounded, and he keeps yelling to Bud, "Turn the boat so you're not such a target," because they're within distance of shore fire. And this is Kelly getting into the boat. I can tell because of his curly hair. He's got a submachine gun, and I later was able to identify who these 2 people were, and getting down into the boat to go out and do that. The loss of the 109, pretty well documented. Yeah, got to get my dates right. August 1st, the Japanese, that night is going to be a moonless night. So what they do is a preemptive strike. They come all the way around. Remember when Rendova was? They come up the backside of that volcanic cone, come down onto the harbor, and do bombing and strafing on Ron 9 and the boats in the harbor to try to eliminate that threat before they come down that night. Because I'm going to come down with troops and material. I want to kill all these guys before they come across. So they did hit 2 boats, blew the bow off of one of the boats. No one was injured, fortunately. It hit the skipper's quarters, but guess where the skipper is? He's out on the island. So they run those to ground and just abandoned them. One of the little horrifying moments is as the attack is underway and the Japanese planes are coming along, Americans have they had some new mechanism. They're very precise in hitting Japanese planes that were attacking. And as the planes, if you're familiar with Japanese planes, they have no rubber bladders into their gas tanks, which is why when you see the pictures of our guys pursuing the Japanese plane and it blows up, they always blew up in a big ball of flame. They did not have resealable rubber bladders in their fuel tanks. So as soon as anything went wrong, fuel would spew everywhere and anything would make the plane blow up. Welford said they were in the harbor, and not only was their material coming down, but there were crewmen now splashing down from high above, because Japanese also thought it was cowardly to have parachutes. So they're just falling out of the sky, landing in the harbor, and they'll spend the next couple of days roping them and towing them out to sea, because they didn't want them around their boats, because you know what happens after a couple of days in the water. So they said it was you just got to shake your head and go, okay, you didn't believe in parachutes, and you don't have any rubber bladders. They didn't really invest into saving their people. They just believed cowards wear parachutes and rubber bladders are for wimps, and there you had the result. So they blew a lot of the planes out of the sky. That's the night that all boats are called out. So let me say that of all the boats in Andover Harbor, there might be 18 boats, 9 would go out each night, and the other 9 would recover. Because you're doing this whole night shift thing. So you can't do that night overnight. So in this particular night, they know from naval intelligence that everyone's coming down the slot, so everyone's out. And that's the incident where this is Kalamagara again, 10,000 Japanese on this island. This is the tip of New Georgia. This is Blackett Strait. And the Japanese ships are going to be close to shoreline coming down this way. So as a commander, you set up your picket line of PT boats along here to try to pick them off as they come. Skipper goes out with the 157, and there's 3 other boats in his particular group, and one of them is the 109. So the 109 and another PT boat sort of drift off. It's a little hard to keep track of everybody at night. They drift off, and Skipper doesn't see them for the rest of the night. So he and the other boat see one of the troop carriers, and this is when he fires his torpedoes dead on, and nothing happens. He says, I fired my torpedoes, I couldn't have missed. So, by the way, I think one of the things, when the bulb went out, firing a torpedo was not a magic elixir. The torpedo tubes were greased. So one of the reasons you get rid of torpedoes, they're greased. And they were fired with a dry charge on the back. Electronically fired, and the torpedo man would stand by with a rubber mallet. So if the skipper yelled fire up at the electronic panel and it didn't make it go up, they'd slam the firing pin for the dry charge, which then pushed the torpedo out of the tube. Well, a dry charge, guess what happened to the grease inside the tubes? It often came out with a flame. So again, you're trying to do this very stealthy, moving up, fire these torpedoes, and now you just eliminated a flame inside your torpedo tube. So it wasn't a gimme that firing a torpedo was going to make the deal happen. Again, showing what will happen. So what will happen is that Kennedy will be, and the 109's about in this area, and the Amagiri, who we met earlier, will be the one that strikes. I took this from a National Geographic. So National Geographic went out to find in 2002 the PT-109. And one of the people who they asked as an expert, they brought up some of the metal pieces and asked Wilford West. They brought him down to Washington, D.C. and asked him to identify these pieces as being actual pieces from a PT boat, not necessarily the PT-109, but he said yes, they were. So I took this. So you all know the Kennedy story, right? So 2 guys died immediately. They're the motor max down below. They didn't have a prayer. The PT-109 gets cut sort of diagonally. So the rear of the boat sinks immediately. That's where the motor max die. There's a huge fireball that the Japanese boat commander said, yeah, there's a huge fireball on either side of us at that moment. And then the bow of the boat, the PT-109 floated. Again, it's wood. It has an air bubble inside, so it's floating along. The Kennedy rustles up the remaining crewmen, and some of them are badly injured through the fire, through the flames of the explosion, and move them over to a small island. And then what they do for the next couple of nights is Kennedy and his XO will go out onto shoals trying to wait for a PT boat to come by to hail them. But there are no PT boats in that area for the next few nights. So they're on their own. It wasn't until they moved to another smaller island that some natives came upon them. And they're like, and they can't talk to each other. So Kennedy takes a coconut and then takes his knife and he carves a message into the coconut. Gives it to the native. The native says, okay. native disappears. The native is working for an Australian coast watcher. So these islands, even Columbagara, have our people being, in this case, Australians, looking for action and radioing it in, risking their life every night, what's happening, going on out there. So it's about 6 days later, it all comes together in the coconut arrives. The Australian Coast Watcher sees the bow of the PT-109 floating around and radios in that there seems, and the radio transmissions were not nearly as good, and it took a while for information to come back. So one day, natives come into the Rendova Harbor and they're like, we need to talk to somebody. And somebody knows what they're saying. And they go talk to the PT guys. So they row over and they go up to the 157, and Welford sees the natives with the coconut and hails them on board. And they start to pass around the coconut on the crew, and they go, So they send it back to the island with the officers on board, and that's when action is starting to take place. And the commander looks at it. Now, first of all, the boat that was with the 109 claimed that everyone died. So it was a shock. And they did not know how to tell Kennedy's family. If you are aware, John Kennedy's dad had been an ambassador to England at the beginning of World War II. So he's a pretty heavyweight guy. Plus the Kennedys made a lot of money off of bootlegging illegal liquor before World War II. But we won't talk about that. So he's an important, who wants to, is he really dead? No, he's really dead. They died. I actually talked to the XO of that boat, and he wanted to tell me something. He said, he had a very southern accent. When I get home, I want to tell you something. And I think I was going to get basically a deathbed confession. So he got home, and I called, and his wife said he's asleep. I said, all right, I'll call tomorrow, and I called the next day, and he died. So I never quite got what happened, that the second boat probably was reluctant to approach the fireball area for fear that people on Columbagara might fire upon them. And they just came back and said everyone died. So this became a big surprise. And because these people said they were dead, and now I got a coconut that says they're alive, it might be a trap. So who do we put into this? The PT-157, who has shown an inordinate amount of skill in their capability to the commander. And he says, okay, and if you watch the movie, he says, leave it now, you're going to go out. I think it was the PT-172 had radar. He says, PT-172 will go out and do a scan, give you a thumbs up if there's nothing around, and then you're going to have to go with the natives and figure out how to noodle your way through the shallows, the coral-infested shallows, and find this island and see what's there. Okay, sure. We'll leave at sundown. So they did it. Now, one of the things about Welford West, remember I told you he was a torpedo man? He was also a fisherman. He knew how to run a lead line. The old Mark Twain lead line. You throw a rope over and you measure your depth. So Welford's out on the bow. It's a near moonless night. You got natives trying to tell you where to go. Bud's at the wheel of this 80-foot boat, and he's listening to Welford, who's doing soundings, telling them this way, this way, this way. Noodling their way through these uncharted waters, and if they were charted, there's no way you could tell where you are on the map anyway. And finally get to this island. And he comes within, Bud's very proud of this, because some people try to say he never got closer than a quarter mile to the island. He says, no, I got within 2 boat lengths of the island. Because somebody misread something from a logbook that said Bud was no, he said, I was 2 boat lengths from the island. So they come out and they're like, where have you been? And Bud's like, shut up. And we don't know what's on these islands around here. So Welford, no, not Welford, but the rear gunner, who's a small guy, Ray Mock, and another crewman get on the boat, and they shuffle back and forth with that dinghy I told you about, bringing the wounded back to the boat, get everybody on board. One of the people on the boat is a medic, and it turns out that medic, the skipper, I should have told you in the beginning, Skipper was married before he went to war. Welford doesn't marry until after the war. So the skipper's wife is a medic in the army, and he had served in North Africa. Well, his assistant is now the medic for their Iran. So again, one of those coincidences. It says, okay, so you know my father-in-law really well because you served with him in North Africa. It's like, this is getting spooky. So anyway, everyone's on board. There's a couple of other commanders on board because they see this as an important thing. And there's been a lot of work by me to understand exactly who was on board, asking the 2 remaining people who would know, and checking logs because there have been other people claiming to have been on board the PT-157 that night, and they were not. I had to do a lot of research. I didn't just want to say out of hand, but I took a lot of research to do that. So they pick them up, they crack open the medicinal liquor, feed these guys, and come back to harbor. But it was just doing my job. But it was a magnificent amount of seamanship for and fortune for Welford to be on the bow, know how to direct Bud as to how to get out of these shoals and get back to base.
How long were they stranded?
6.5 days. And all they had was coconut milk and stuff they could scrape out of a coconut. And Bud doesn't get any medals for this or anything. This is just what Bud does. You know, there's other things he'll get a medal for. This is so this is Kalamagara. Okay, I got 10,000 Japanese on this island. This is where the cruisers want to come down and lay people or put people on the island or give them supplies. PT boats are across here during the night. This is where it sinks, and then they swim. Kennedy, if you remember, the guys that were hurt were put in life jackets, and Kennedy puts the life jacket lanyards in his teeth and physically just moves with them to get to an island and bring them back. Kennedy, I read a lot about Kennedy in this incident. Kennedy was pretty much a world-class playboy before he went into the Navy. This is the moment when he found his guts. He found himself. It was a turning point, as it would be in anyone's life. For whatever you're doing beforehand, this was a moment. To have that sort of incident happen, to have lost 2 people, was a moving moment. Another shot of the island. This is, I believe, Plum Island here. So Kalamagara is over here. The channel's over here. This little island would be the one they swam to as the closest island. Another night. We're still in the summer of 43. It's been quite a summer. 2 Marines transports are moving shiploads of Marines up to North Georgia because we want to get ready to push forward and start to push the Japanese off of Kalamagara. So the PT-157 and the PT-154, I know the PT-154 because I met the skipper's son at the funeral, Bud's funeral. It's a great little world, these PT guys. So right about here, they're spotted by a Japanese plane. It's night. And they're spotted by a Japanese plane. So the Japanese plane is starting to make its beeline for these transports, drops a few bombs, doesn't really hit the ship, splashes. And let me see if I drew this right. Yeah, splash, splash. A lot of water on deck, no one really hurt yet. So the PT-154 and the 157, certain crews just really got along with other crews, and they couldn't talk enough about how good these crews were. Like the 157 talk about the guys on the 154 and vice versa. So what do? They come up with this scheme, the 2 PT boats. They start doing big circles to draw attention because whatever moonlight there is hitting the wakes coming off of their boat. Welford's on the back in this case with the smoke machine. And as the plane comes down to try to bomb them, he turns on the smoke and then the skipper veers so the bomb falls harmlessly through the smoke into the water while the PT goes over here. And then the 154 sees what skipper's doing and they start to make this big circle. So they're churning the hell out of the water. You know, the water's lighting up, they're making these wakes. one boat's following the other, and and meanwhile, while they're capturing the attention of this Japanese pilot, is like, I want to sink these guys, and I'm not getting the job done. The transports continue on their way, so they're sort of out of the picture. So it's now the two PTs chasing each other's tails on purpose this time, making as much noise, firing their guns. Matter of fact, the forward turret gunner, Smitty, actually fired at the plane, and you weren't allowed to fire on anything in the sky unless the skipper said it was okay. So I said, Skipper, I heard that Smitty fired at this plane. Yeah, it's okay. That's why his crew loved him, is he knew how to depend on his crew, and his crew depended on him. There was none of the micromanaging stuff that they were getting from that XO, is he knew that you guys knew your job. And by the way, one of the mantras of a PT boat is if you're the last man alive, you are trained to bring that boat back. So everybody knows each other's jobs and they can cover each other. But like if you're a left guard and a right guard in football, you don't look at the right guard and see how he's doing. You just take care of your job. And so that's why they adored Liebenau, is he had that game plan. He was also a boxer before the war. And I couldn't figure out for the life of me, because I'm trying to drill into the psyche of some of these guys about how Liebenau was a little different than other skippers. Until 2 years into our conversations, he goes, yeah, I did some boxing. And I went, that makes sense. Because what's a boxer do? A boxer's a close-in competition, right? Hit, get hit, respond, hit, respond. That's what a PT boat attitude was all about, is you were at close quarters. You were hitting, getting hit, you were counter punching the whole time. So this played right into a psyche that this person had. An extraordinary thing. There's the other boat, they're running circles. I have to show off my circles. The Marines get safely into harbor. The PT's, the plane is like dispensed with everything it has. It's missed everything. It goes home. The PTs go back to harbor. And Bud said, it was really nice. He said, we came in at the dock at the harbor where the Marines were getting off. He said they all started to shout and scream and applaud for what we had done, to let them get out of that situation, for them to take the heat. So a lot of simpatico going on there between, thanks for saving my butt. Yeah, I think this is the last mission for Bud. It's September 1st, 1943. So the activity I've described is only from June 1st to September 1st, 1943. And remember, they only went out every other night. And these are some of the missions, and there's some other missions that were like, really, that are in the book that I don't even talk about here because I'm limited to 4 hours of speaking time. So, so again, the PT-157 is called upon to do an interesting mission. They're to take 2 Marines from Lever Harbor. So we've gone from Rendova here, and now what we've done is, this is the new base of operations, which is on the slot side. They're to take 2 Marines and put them on the backside of Kalamagara. All right, I don't know who they are, but 2 Marines that are willing to go scout out an island with 10,000 Japanese on it. That frequently, Welford said you could get close enough to these islands, you can smell them fishing, cooking their fish at night, their dinners. That's how close this was. So 2 Marines are going to be put out onto here. And it's like, all right, you got to figure out that this is extraordinary people that they're putting on there. So what Bud did is he had a tendency. He said, we had the mufflers down, silent in, started drifting in, drop them off, and he sat down on the front of the boat. The boat is flat and it has this deck house, and he sat down and leaned back. He said, I used to wait, 5-7 minutes, whatever my nerve could stand, in case they got on shore and somebody started to shoot at them right away. I wanted to be able to extract them, to take them back out. I wasn't supposed to do that, but that's what I wanted to do. Because if those guys are that kind of guy to go in there, I want that guy, I got to pull him out if something goes really wrong. So nothing happens. It's silent. He goes to get up and he can't get up. His knee is locked. So he goes to get up and Welford, and he's like backpedaling up and he says, I can't bend my knee. So Welford comes running around and Welford's like, I'm pushing on his knee. I don't want to lose our skipper because, if the skipper can't do anything, he's going to be relieved of command. It doesn't work. His knee is locked up. So they get back to base and he's relieved command of the 157. So he's given a choice. He can go down to Australia, and Australia's the medics down there have kindly offered to slice his knee open like a Rand McNally map, pull out all the stuff. I grew up in an age when your knee operation was they just ripped the crap out of everything inside your knee and put a big stitching all around your knee and said you're okay. Well, you're okay until you're about 30 and you realize your bones are rubbing together. But said, I'll just take base duty up back at Lever Harbor and see how it goes. 11 days later, the first crewman of the 157 is killed because up at Lever Harbor, what happened is, remember we talked about the PT boats transitioning? They're transitioning once again. The Japanese have given up sending big ships down. They started putting barges. They're starting to move barges down, and the barges hug the coastline. And it's like a train going along the coastline, these barges. So what they're doing is they've already taken the torpedo tubes off. It's late 1943, fall of 1943. And they're starting to put guns on the decks of the PT boats and turning them into scoot and shoot boats to try to go by the barges and shoot up at the barges. Bud's knee is getting better. Kelly, who's the commander, doesn't really like this action. This is not what he envisaged for PT boat action. And it's my determination by what I read, where Kelly wrote very little when he was doing the frontline action, but now he's not. Kelly started to show the commanders how much ammo that they were expending trying to do this barge busting business, pointing out to them that my ships are really made out of wood. There's nothing to protect these guys from doing this kind of a mission. So I believe what has happened is Kelly volunteered his top guy, which was our skipper Liebenau, to Bulkley, the commander of all PTs worldwide. Bulkley's looking for a few people to put into the European theater. And I think Kelly wanted to get Liebenau out of this god-awful duty of barge busting and give him to Bulkley and let Bulkley transition him to Europe. So Welford stays on the boat. And Welford, you were supposed to be replaced 6 months after you're on a boat because life on the boat was hard. The impacting, the lifestyle was very hard. Bud ends up being on a boat for over a year and a half. Until one day, he says, the first mission I ever missed, I went to Doc. He said, Doc, I don't feel good. And Doc laid me down on a cot and looked at me and looked at my record and gave me a shot. He said, I had the most wonderful sleep I ever had. He said, when I woke up, I had a toe tag that says, you're going home. And he looked at Welford and said, you're done. You shouldn't have been here nearly this long. So Welford's going to go home. He's going to recover. And he's going to do training at Melville, Rhode Island, where they do PT boat training. So he's going to train about torpedoes. That's going to be his new assignment. Bud shipped over to Europe, where he's assigned with the OSS. So that's the precursor to the CIA, Offices, Secret Service, Special Services. So he's gone with the British, and they're dropping off agents to the shorelines and picking up down flyers who've made their way back. And there's a whole system, there's a whole network going on. The underground, as it became known in Europe, that they could radio back and say, we've got a couple of flyers that we've picked up. Because you're going to lose 17,000 flyers in B-17s over Europe, so you've got a lot of guys alive. Not all of them are in camps, and they're working their way back because they know what they're supposed to try to do. So they're picking up and they're dropping people off. To the run-up on D-Day, he actually was in a PT boat that dropped a few people off that went to the shores of D-Day. And what they did is they came back with vials of sand because they wanted to know what kind of sand was on the beaches to see if they could support the weight of tanks and the other amphibious vehicles that were going to be put onto that sand. So D-Day itself, Bud is assigned to the USS Corey to be USS Corey is a cruiser, and USS Corey is going to go near the front lines during D-Day and do shore fire. And if anything comes up, Bud is supposed to be there to help out. Well, whether it hit a mine or got hit by shore fire, the Corey is hit and sunk within minutes on D-Day. So Bud goes around and his crew and picks up, I think it was 63 Corey sailors, and puts them on the deck of the PT boat. Bud brought 3 of them back to life himself with CPR. Bringing those guys back. And that was the PT 199, which is why when he signs a book, he always signs a 157/199. So he said, Bud said, I went to a reunion of the 199, and I was brought up on stage, and some of the other, how come they never talk about what you did for the 199? Saved our lives. And Bud said, I told them you never grew up to be president. Everybody wants to know about that. So, for his actions in the Pacific, the one I told you about where they ran circles around, and another one, Bud was given the Silver Star. It was actually applied for a higher, like a DSC, but he got a Silver Star. And for his actions in the Atlantic, he was given a Bronze Star. One of the few people who participated so much in both theaters like he did, in frontline actions. When I knew Bud, he had 2 hearing aids, and his wife Lucy said, well, Bud's got 2 hearing aids because he got D-Day hearing. I said, what's that? He said, all the soldiers and the sailors in the front line, the guns firing at them all day long. Later on, it created scar tissue, and later on, they started to lose their hearing. So there's this phenomenon of people at this front line stuck between the ships firing this way and the Germans firing this way, that the hearing loss was such that Bud had 2 hearing aids. So whenever I talked to Bud on the phone, he had a special phone, and Lucy could always hear, and she'd always chirp in, how you doing, Bridge? And I said, fine, Lucy. The epilogue. This is Sam Corey. Sam Corey was a radio man extraordinary. I told you about the interesting combination of people they put on the 157. Sam had been a telegrapher for the railroad before the war. So he joined right after Pearl Harbor. So Sam could hear the telegraph as it went off down below decks, and he could tell you what was being said. He didn't have to do much of anything. He was an extraordinary guy. September 11th, skipper's gone. The XO is now in charge. They're doing barge busting. Welford's up on the front deck and he's firing away. They've stolen some guns from airplanes that have been scrapped at the airfield. So they're using actually guns meant for airplanes because it's now a deck firing campaign going on. Sam comes up with a box of ammo to give it to Welford, and Sam is struck through the hips, slumps over the raft, and he makes it back to Lever Harbor, put on a medical ship, but he dies at 2 o'clock in the morning. So the one time when I talked to Welford where he started to cry was when he talked about Sam. Everybody loves Sam. He was a great guy, and doing what he did, trying to bring ammo up for Welford and get hit like that, was a hard moment for him. So as they do an impromptu moment, monuments, they called it Corey Dock. This is out of somebody's scrapbook. Sam Corey killed September 11, 1943, Lever Harbor, 1950, PT 157, New Georgia. So I asked Bud later on, I said, so what did it do with, you got to do this, you're a researcher, right? Researcher?
Yeah.
You like research? What'd they do with his body? I don't know. It's a Navy thing, so maybe they just overboard. I said, okay. So we just left it at that. One of the nice things about the way these books are written is I can update them. And so I'm still digging for information, even though the book's in theory done. Oops. So there's one of these incidents where somebody in Greenville, North Carolina, claimed to be the last, and he died, and said he was on the PT boat that saved the 109 crew. So I've got this electronic community that immediately contacts me and says, "Did you hear about this? Do you know this guy?" I said, "No, this is bogus." So I do a lot of research on that. I won't get into that, but I discredit the whole thing. But somebody down in Alabama heard that story and heard that, next to the skipper and blah, blah, blah. So he actually contacted the skipper, who was Sam's nephew, who was only 6 years old when his uncle went off to war. And they communicated with each other. Well, it turned out that after the war, if you were a soldier and airman, you signed a form and said, if I am killed, bury me where I died, or send me home, my remains. So Sam had filled out, take me home. So about 1947, the U.S. is still repatriating the remains of dead soldiers and airmen. And so in 1947, knowing it's coming, the train pulls up, and here comes Sam's body, and he's buried in a nearby cemetery. The next day, his father and grandfather are leaving the cemetery and are hit by a truck and they're killed. So it was like, okay. But now we know where Sam is. I got the story. People reach out to me when I was doing this book. They reach out and, what do you know about my father? What do you know? And I found a lot of extraordinary things, and I found a lot of extraordinary people. One of the gratifying things about writing this book is one of the crewmen, Ray Mock, who's a really small guy. He should have been a jockey. He's the road turret gunner. And I found out a lot about turrets. The way you ran a turret gunner is you had a seat that wrapped around your hips. And the way you moved the turret is you shimmied your hips around and with your feet to move your gun. I'm saying, well, I guess they put Ray in there because he was small. But he had Alzheimer's. So his daughter from Nevada contacted me. And I told her about the book and sent her a book. And a few months later, she wrote to me and said, Dad died, and he had Alzheimer's. But the last night when he was lucid, how people go in and out of that, the last night he was lucid, I read to him from your book, and he laughed, and he was blind at that point. He laughed because I mispronounced Kolomogara and all these other island names, and he laughed, and he corrected me, and we had a great time. And that was the last time I had a lucid conversation with him. So I was like, it makes you feel good that you were able to lay that down and somebody can enjoy that, with their family member. So what did it do with the PT boats after World War II? Somebody mentioned the one up in New Orleans, and there's one up in Seattle that never went overseas, and I think there's one in Boston. Well, the Navy decided, and I think there's two folds to this strategy, they didn't want the boats back. So they ordered all the people in place to strip them of their armor and other essential materials and burn them at the islands. So what you're seeing is the burning of the PT boats. The other strategy is there were a lot of Russians hanging around, and there was a fear that the Russians would get a hold of the PT boats, and they didn't want that to happen either. So the Deepwater Navy didn't want, these boats were tired, all right? They've been out there for 3 or 4 years. They're wood. We don't know how to train people to play on wooden boats. We're an all steel Navy now. We got our carriers back and our cruisers and battleships back. It's a sad epitaph for a very fine boat, though. They did take off the builder's plaques as one of the things they did when they decommissioned them before they burned them. So this one is in the Battleship Cove in Boston, in the museum there. That's for the 157, noting the Elko Naval Division of Bayonne, New Jersey, 1942. So what happens to our skipper? Well, he has a job with the railroad, identifying hazardous materials. It's 1962, and guess who's running for president? SOB I pulled off the island is running for president. So Jack's team says, hey, you want to go with us on a couple of stops? Okay. So here you have it. Here's candidate Jack Kennedy, who's been a senator, now running for president, talking with Bud. And in the book, there's a quote. It's a semi-quote, but it's pretty literal. Is they were at a whistle stop and somebody yelled out, "I was on the boat that night." Jack says, "You recognize him?" Bud said, "Oh." And he told Bud, he says, if everyone who said it was on the boat that night voted for me, I'd win by landslide. So that's the quote that's underneath the picture of them. Kennedy wins the election. Bud and Lucy get invited to one of the gala events. So of course they're sort of way down the list as priorities of things happen. They're sitting way back in the hall. So somehow Bud's near the front and Jack hails him over. He says, "Come here." He says, "Where's your beautiful wife?" "Oh, we're sitting in the back." And Jack turns and says, "From the Secret Service fan out and make a line all the way back down to Lucy and escort her up to the front." And Jack brings them both up on stage. You have those moments. Life isn't just life itself, it's those moments. So that was a pretty cherished moment for her. I hear about all this stuff from my husband and all the stuff that he did, but I get a little piece of the result here. So Lucy loved that moment. So Bud dies. It takes about 8 months. He was cremated, so it takes about 8 months for it to get approved to be buried at Arlington, because you have to submit and see if you're worthy of being buried at Arlington. He was last summer, which was the hottest, most humid day, summer, I think, back east in quite a while. But we were invited, and I was asked to speak. And my wife and I went on what turned out to be the two most glorious weather days in Washington, D.C. And we went through the whole thing of, that's the PT-109 I told you about, where they went after looking for the PT-109. And there's the three of us at a book signing. So Bud lived in Mount Airy, North Carolina, which is otherwise known as Mayberry. That's where, and Betty Lou, you know Betty Lou from the Mayberry TV series? She lived in the same building that Lucy and Bud lived in. And I did a talk at the Veterans facility there. So I land, I go in and do a talk. Betty Lynn's there, who played Betty Lou. I said, "Why didn't they just call you Betty Lynn?" So it's Betty Lou. Then she's got on a USO pin, and she says, "I performed for the troops during World War II, so I want to be part of your weekend." So she trooped around with us for the entire weekend. But that's where Andy Griffith was born and raised, and it is still Mayberry. We went and had hot dogs after the book signing. They cost like $1.50 each, and the Cokes were like 75 cents. So this is in Mayberry. Skipper on the left side here and Wilford on the right side. They had not seen each other for years and years. One of the saddest is when they parted, because they knew that this wasn't going to happen again, because Wilford's nephew had actually flown down from Boston to Norfolk, rented a car, picked up his uncle, and brought him over for this event. So the full military funeral. I never thought I'd have any cause to attend a full military funeral, but that got pretty much the whole shebang. They got the band, the horses and the caissons. It was, and as I said, the weather was just unbelievable. We couldn't dial it in any better. So this is Walford's wife. As I said, married before the war, lasted the whole life. That's his son, Mike, and Mike's wife. And the daughter is behind me. So Bud had a son and a daughter. And this is the picture that emblazoned the front of the Washington Post the next day. About this big. I helped put the article together. I'm trying to be humble here, but I called it the Washington Post and said the guy that rescued Kennedy, blah, 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 blah. I did the story. They picked it up. And they wrote a substantial article about the whole event. This was the picture that was on the front. So this is Lucy, Bud's widow. That's the hair of Sue, the daughter. And this is your bald-headed speaker up here. I didn't even notice it until later because I was just looking at the flag on the Lucy. And my wife said, "You're in the picture." I said, "What?"
Yeah. It's called Hueneme.
It was, and they had a celebration. I mean, Bud died within 3 days of getting pneumonia, so it wasn't anything. He worked out every day.
Wow.
He swam for an hour. He'd swim laps in a pool twice a week or 3 times a week, all of his life. But he suddenly got pneumonia and died that quickly. He was about, I think he was 92 when he passed away.
Oh, that's
And then what you can do, you don't see it at the time, but later on you can go on to the website for Arlington and look somebody up, and they take a photo of every headstone, and it can be found. And so this is Bud's headstone.
There it is.
So from the aces and eights to you, that's my model boat. It actually runs. One thing I forgot to tell you now is it that detailed, but it works exactly. All the water characteristics of the PT-157 model is as a real boat. The water line, the way it works, the kicking up of the rooster tail, they called it behind the boat, all works fine. But thank you for listening to these guys.
Questions people have?
Questions? Yes.
So how long did they use bad torpedoes before they figured it out?
From the PT boat, now, excellent question, because the submarine guys were having the same problem. They were saying, we're shooting right, we're not hitting. So now it comes the PT guys, and so somebody's putting this together and figuring this out. So I'd say it must have been, let's see, 43, so about 18 months into the war. Yeah. So everyone's putting themselves putting themselves right at that moment when you dare, I better fire now or I'm going to die. And then find out that those torpedoes didn't work. There's a big congressional investigation, and I think it was kept as very silent because who wants to know that your torpedoes are no good? Yes?
There was a movie about those torpedoes, and I'm not sure what the name of the movie was. The guys were dropping the torpedoes, hit the water, and they would explode in the water, or they
But
wouldn't.
those are the torpedoes they used later on. The aerial, they actually went to the aerial torpedoes and they put them on hanging racks. So what they do is they cut them loose and they would roll off, and the torpedo, once it hit one of the things about a torpedo I didn't realize is a quick forward motion will make the engine go inside of a torpedo. So in front of the torpedo tubes, you'll often see a torpedo stuffed in, but there's what I call a bikini strap in front to keep the torpedo from rocking around, because if they get a G-force, it'll actually engage the engine.
No more questions? Well, thank you very much.
Oh.
Here's your certificate of appreciation.
Thank you.
We're very pleased that you did.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay.
Camera.
I don't know what the next speaker is going to be. I think let me see.
Oh, we get a schedule?
No, I think I have it on my phone here.
Oh.
We have, the next speaker comes on the 15th. Oh, this is going to be very special. Jose Alamillo, and he's going to be talking about a newspaper in El Rio that went out of business, and he just did the whole history of what happened there. So it's a pretty interesting one. And then we're going to also have another one on the 22nd. Linda Benz is going to be talking again about her the fish